1994 was the year where punk truly went pop, especially in the US. For the most part, punk was an underground concern. There was no chance that you could become rich, famous, or even financially secure playing punk rock. But then post-Nirvana, louder, more alternative sounds made it to the radio and MTV. And alongside Green Day, The Offspring brought Dayglow Anarchy to the masses, selling several million copies of their third album, Smash. Their tales of road rage, lopsided relationship dynamics, and gang violence pinned to start-stop buzzsaw guitars smashed all previous expectations of what was chart-worthy. Then 4 years later they did it again with Pretty Fly for a White Guy, a satirical look at a hapless poser. Smart and dumb in equal measure, this is how The Offspring popped punk. Growing up in Orange County, California, Dexter Holland was kinda a geek. He was on the less than prestigious cross-country team with future bandmate Greg Creasel, and split his time in school between getting dunked in trash cans by guys who listened to Def Leppard, and studying hard enough to be valedictorian of his graduating class in 1984. By his early teens he discovered the Flying Lizards, B-52s, and Devo. And soon, through a Rodney on the Rock compilation, got into punk. Alongside his studies, he watched punk bands at house parties. By the time he'd finished school, he'd already been in his first riot at a Social Distortion show, first-hand experiencing the smell of tear gas and the baton brutality of the LAPD. Despite this, he went all in on punk rock, forming Manic Subsidal in 1984. 2 years later, they'd smartly renamed themselves The Offspring, and their classic lineup soon fell into place with Holland on guitar and vocals, Greg Kay on bass, Ron Welty on drums, and Kevin Noodles Wasserman on guitar. However, the mid-80s was not the best moment for the South Californian punk scene. Shows had become relentlessly violent, both from police suppression and gang involvement, and most of the great bands had either split up, or in the case of Black Flag, Circle Jerks, and TSOL, gone metal. Because of this, The Offspring made very little progress in the 80s, doing the band part-time in conjunction with college, and name-tagged employment. When Dexter asked me to join, I said, absolutely. But it was just punk rock. I love the music, I love the songs, but I didn't think it was really going to go anywhere. I didn't think it was going to be a career. Even to think that back then was ridiculous. If you'd said to anyone, I'm in a punk band, and that's what I want to do for a living, they'd have laughed in your face. Amongst part-time jobs and education, The Offspring ventured out on their first tours, packed up in an old truck as they drove the continental United States. For the most part, they were playing for 10 or 20 people per show, but there were occasions where it went worse. One time when playing with self-described peace punks, Final Conflict, Noodles attempted to talk down some enraged skinheads that had swarmed the venue. For his role as mediator, he was rewarded with a knife in his arm. All in all, their first decade was hard and cripplingly unprofitable, but they delighted in the music and the brief respite of not working their regular jobs. We'd usually find someone to put us up, and usually the promoter would give us enough to get to the next town, $50 or so. I don't know if we got fed or not, but we had a lot of Taco Bell. I guess it was probably about 5 years after we started that we got signed to Nemesis. But we did do our own 7-inch single in '87. We financed it and pressed 1,000 copies. and had a hell of a time getting rid of them. By the end, we were just giving them away. Under Nemesis, the band released their self-titled debut in 1989, a cocktail of Californian pop hardcore, sprinkled with the comic murkiness of Misfits and TSOL.
Mommy doesn't have her head anymore. Keep it underneath my bed on the floor. Well, that's alright, man, that's okay.
Like the single, it took the band a while to shift the initial 5,000 copies. Because of this, the Offspring were on the lookout for a more high-profile punk label. Dead Kennedy's Jello Biafra had refused to sign them to his Alternative Tentacles label after he'd witnessed the band play a particularly bad gig, telling Holland he should get some singing lessons. Epitaph owner Bad Religion's Brett Gurewitz had given them a bit more hope. In 1991, after Gurewitz engineered an early version of Take It Like a Man for a Flipside comp, he sidestepped them with a Not Right Now. It wouldn't last. The Offspring would be signed to Epitaph by the end of the year. And because of the bigger profile afforded to them by being on the label, as well as tours with bands like Bad Religion, NoFX and Pennywise, the Offspring's second album, Ignition, from October 1992, sold 3 times as much as their debut in less than a year. Being that Epitaph was a punk label in the early 90s, they weren't expecting their albums to sell millions. 50,000 was the best anyone could expect. Supposedly what Black Flag's Damaged and Circle Jerk's Group Sex had sold. What Brett Gurewitz saw as punk rock gold. And if you went punk rock gold, he treated the band to an ice cream cake. So between 1982 and 93, Bad Religion, NoFX and Pennywise got ice cream cakes.
Oh yeah, like the blood on my door. Got something sticking in my eye. Let me hear you say, whoa, we want a revolution.
But the Offspring had to wait. At the same time, alternative music was having its moment in the mainstream. In January 1982, Nirvana had displaced Michael Jackson at the top of the Billboard charts. Nirvana definitely blew the doors open. All of a sudden you were seeing Smells Like Teen Spirit on MTV, and that video looked like a punk rock show. It looked like when we played Gilman Street in Berkeley. It made everything kinda seem possible, because from that video it was just one little step to Henry Rollins, or to the Smashing Pumpkins. It just got closer and closer, and by 94, people were ready for it. By the end of 1983, Dexter Holland was trying to decide where to fully commit. Having previously decided against medical school, due to it being impossible to do alongside the band. He'd majored in biology at USC, got his master's in molecular biology, and was just a dissertation away from completing his doctorate. He was in a long-term relationship, had a daughter, and his little punk band was stopping him from entering the real world. What clinched it was the band's first visit to Europe. The tour's headliners, NoFX, accumulated so much cash that they asked the Offspring to carry some of it through customs. Seeing that there may be a chance to continue doing the band thing for a living, the Offspring entered Track Record in North Hollywood and started work on their third album, Smash, in January 1994. Their budget for the album was $20,000, which meant recording for reduced rates during studio downtime. Producer Tom Wilson was essential to the band reaching the next level with their songwriting. Tom and I talked about stuff a lot. We talked about the theory behind it. I learnt a lot from Tom during the process. He'd say stuff like, I love the energy of punk rock, but I can't stand the way it's just noise. There's no place to breathe. There's no breaks. So we started thinking about, how can you take punk rock and make it sound good? One of the things I took to heart and started doing on Smash was leaving instruments out. That was a way to try and make it sound better. So while they still retain the flat-out hardcore gallops of Nitro, Youth Energy and So Alone, here the Offspring began really toying with dynamics and songs of a slower tempo. One of the most notable experiments was Self-Esteem. In a way it was built like a Nirvana song, quieter verses powered by bass and drums. I wrote her off for the 10th time today. with loud, impactful, almost wordless choruses. The fact that it opens with the band sloppily chanting the main riff of Smells Like Teen Spirit only adds to the effect. Not that everyone was immediately on board. It took Noodles a while to recalibrate, not going at warp speed. Lyrically, Self-Esteem deals with an abusive, loveless relationship. A girlfriend variously taking advantage of the voice character.
She came over, I lost my nerve. I took her back and made her dessert.
Because the song is written in first person, many have come to the conclusion that Holland is the self-esteemless sucker of the song.
I know I'm being used. It's okay, man, 'cause I like the abuse.
But in fact, it is mostly a composite of various friends' experiences.
This rejection got me so low. She keeps it up, I just might tell her so.
Yeah, they all think my girlfriend must be really shitty to me. But what really surprised me is the amount of guys who can identify with those feelings. Most guys I know heard that song and said, "Dude, did you write that about me?"
I know, playing with me. That's okay, 'cause I got no self-esteem.
Other songs were influenced by Holland's experiences living in Orange County. Bad Habit was inspired by increasingly deadly incidents of road rage that plagued the LA freeway at the time.
Got a bad habit. I'm blowing away. Yeah.
As well as Holland's bad habit of driving his battered Chevette too slow in the fast lane, which frequently led to abuse from irate drivers stuck behind him.
You drive on my ass, your foot's on the gas, and your next breath is your last.
Come Out and Play was about the gang culture he saw around him. Kids throwing their lives away over the colours they were wearing.
One guy's colors and the others told me they're gonna bash it up, bash it up, bash it up, bash it up.
Which he admits are the observations of a suburban white guy commenting on what he saw through the windows of his Chevette. Noodles worked as a janitor at a school and witnessed shootings and cars stripped for parts. Holland's sarcastically simplistic chorus solution, though, was a product of his molecular biology research. That was the last song we wrote for Smash. I worked in a lab and I was doing some experiment. I looked at these two flasks and said, "These flasks are never going to cool down. You've got to keep them separated." The guy who delivered that memorable line was Jason McLean, a hardcore Offspring fan, who had earned the band's attention after obnoxiously shouting requests for a first album track that had long left the sets. He did this so frequently that Blackball became his nickname. The early plan was that Snoop Dogg, who was recording down the hall at the same time, would deliver the line, but Snoop refused. Instead, Blackball nailed the line in 2 takes and was paid an In-N-Out burger for his troubles. At the time, Come Out and Play was a gamble, another mid-tempo song, but with a Phrygian, almost surf rock guitar riff. A beat modelled on 70s Latin rock classic War's Lowrider.
Gotta keep them separated.
The talk singing in the verses, and the vocal samples as a hook. It was left field for a punk rock song. But when they handed their completed album over to Gurwitz, instantly he could tell there was more than ice cream cake in their future. I remember when the Offspring turned in the finished record to me. I was driving home listening to it in my car. At the time I was living with my then wife Maggie in North Hollywood, and I remember driving around the neighborhood and circling about 10 times, listening to these 2 songs, Come Out and Play and Self-Esteem. And I just couldn't believe it. They sounded like massive hits to me. I really couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my god. And when I walked into my house, I said to my wife, "Hi honey, I'm home." By the way, we're gonna be rich. "1994 was a banner year for Brett Gurewitz. In the post-Nirvana gold rush, Bad Religion had been signed to Atlantic and released their major label debut, Stranger Than Fiction.
Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Additionally, Epitaph had released a couple of SoCal punk classics in NoFX's Punk in Drublic and Rancid's Let's Go.
Dance me inside your head. When I cut the music, well, I got a place to go.
And sales-wise, The Offspring's Smash, released in April 1994, smashed them all. It started with California's K-Rock playing Come Out and Play. Then the song got bumped to heavy rotation. And then the rest of the nation's alternative radio soon followed suit. Come Out and Play was getting such instant traction, Epitaph gave them $5,000 to make a music video. Due to his interesting but low budget work on Beastie Boys' So What You Want video. They hired Darren Levette to give Come Out and Play a similarly distorted, solarized treatment shot in some guy's garage. Most of the video's budget went on beer and meat for the post-filming barbecue, and that summer it achieved buzz-bin status. Its scrappy lo-fi-ness, seen by millions of teenagers between Black Hole Sun, The Sweater Song, and that trilogy of Aerosmith videos, starring Alicia Silverstone. So sudden was their ascent to rock star status. Creasel was still living with his mother, and Noodles was working as a school janitor. Even when we blew up, I didn't even quit my job outright. I took a 3-year leave of absence. I was still working there when we were blowing up, because I'd promised my boss I wouldn't quit until the end of the school year. There was this one high school girl that I knew there, and she used to see me in the morning and say to me, "Man, what are you doing? I just saw you on MTV." By the end of 1994, Smash had peaked at number 4 on the Billboard album chart and sold 3 million copies in the US alone. It was the first Epitaph record to go actual gold, then platinum, then multi-platinum. Green Day 2 sold a lot of punk-flavored records in 1994, but they were on a major label. The Offspring managed to shift them on an independent, without any of the distribution infrastructure of a major. This was back when records were an exclusively physical medium. Once he realized the hit he had on his hands, Gurewitz remortgaged his house to press as many copies of the album as he could afford, storing them in a half-dozen warehouses across South California, at the same time rebuffing offers from majors to acquire either The Offspring or half of Epitaph. An inadvertent winner in this story is Rick Sims, songwriter for the Illinois trash punk band The Digits. Early after release, he learned The Offspring had covered his band's Killboy Powerhead on Smash. He phoned up Epitaph to ask about royalties, hoping for maybe a couple $1,000s. I asked Brett how many records they'd sold. He said, "Well, it's gonna go gold next week." My jaw hit the floor. So do I like their version of the song? I love their version of the song. I'm still living in a house that The Offspring paid for. I'm still driving a car that The Offspring paid for. I have a retirement estate that The Offspring paid for. Not so lucky were Agent Orange. Head of Posh Boy Records, Robbie Fields, claimed that the surf rock riff of Come Out and Play stole from the solo of their 1980 track, Bloodstains. But it never went to court, the two sections merely using the same harmonic scale. But it was a sign that The Offspring's success had separated them from their punk background, facing hostility just because their punk rock songs were now on MTV. While there were cries of sellout from the Gilman Street set, they tried their best to not overexpose themselves, obscuring their faces in their music videos, and turning down most corporate magazine interviews and TV appearances in their first year, including Saturday Night Live. Their only concession was when they opened the Billboard Awards in December 1994. Their first song choice was the Dead Kennedys cover.
I did the right to fight. I did the right to fight.
but instead they went with an incensed version of their own sweary, bad habit.
You stupid, dumb shit, goddamn mother.
Holland arrived on stage in a purple jacket and a t-shirt reading "Corporate Rock Kills Bands Dead." More than provocative given their album was released the same day Kurt Cobain's body was found. But like with Cobain, they hated the sudden shift in their fanbase. It's a very strange feeling when the people coming to your shows are the people you're writing the music against. A huge proportion of our fans are complete idiots. They really are. They have no idea how to behave. We're thinking of making an educational how to slam dance video and showing it before the shows.
Okay. Yeah.
With the boneheadedness of their new fans weighing on them, and the unshakable feeling that Gurewitz was pulling focus from their achievements to promote himself and his label, the Offspring did the previously unthinkable. They signed to a major, Columbia Records, in early 1986. For their major label debut, they teamed up with Dave Jordan, known for his work with Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction, and Alice in Chains. Released in February 1997, the result was the slightly weirder, more balls-to-the-wall Ixnay on the Hombre. Lead single, the buzz-sawing All I Want, was the Offspring at their most uncluttered.
Day after day, your life's a wreck. The powers that be just breathe down your neck.
A few seconds less than 2 minutes, and originally their attempt to write a Bad Religion song.
It's all I want.
Compared to Smash, Ixnay was seen as a commercial disappointment. This, of course, is relative. Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks, one of the most highly regarded and well-known punk records ever, has sold just under 2 million copies worldwide. The Offspring's supposed disaster of a follow-up sold over 1 million more than that. It seemed that cashing in on punk was a lot easier after 1994. But the album still had its moments. Not only did it contain the song most suited to high-speed cab fare collecting mayhem, it also featured one of the band's first ballads, Gone Away, a reflection on loss that allowed the band to momentarily escape their assumed goofy persona. It was written after Holland and his wife emerged unscathed from a drive-by shooting at a Baskin Robbins. People always talk about the number of records sold, or how the fans in Philly didn't jump up and down that much last time you played there. But I get some letters from people saying how much Gone Away, which is about losing someone, means to them. From parents who have written to me to say that it helped them get over the loss of their son, who died from leukemia. It rips your heart out. But then came Americana, released in November 1998, again produced by Dave Jordan. The album takes a satirical look at the rot just beneath the surface of American life in the late 90s, the isolation, the social dysfunction, and the general wackiness of the reality TV poisoned Jerry Springer generation. And while there are more serious songs, like the existential crisis of Have You Ever, and the broken American dream of The Kids Aren't Alright, is also the album with Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
The world needs one visa. Hey, do that brand new thing.
I was driving to Starbucks and saw this stereotypical white guy doing what we would call today culturally appropriating, with a sideways baseball cap and everything. I said out loud, well, he's pretty fly for a white guy. And all of a sudden I had the line and the inspiration.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.
I rushed back to record the track. I just felt like, if we don't do this now, someone else is gonna write this song, like the Beastie Boys or somebody, because it was happening so much in the culture at that time. But while I figured that fly white guy character would resonate in LA, I didn't expect people to come up to me in Italy and tell me, hey, I know that guy. Showing his science background, he approaches his target as an impartial observer, like David Attenborough explaining the life cycle of a socially shunned penguin.
It's kinda hard just to get along today. Our subject isn't cool, but he thinks it anyway.
As much as it's a song about a clueless white boy costumed in hip-hop chic.
Don't think fake, play us straight. You know it really doesn't get it anyway.
The sentiment applies to anyone that doesn't quite understand the culture they're adopting. Whether that's kids not being well versed enough in NWA, or mohawk wearers that haven't felt the sting of a police baton. Posers exist everywhere.
May not have a clue and he may not have style, but everything he lacks, well, he makes up in denial.
Pretty Fly returns to the template they had forged with Come Out and Play. The talk singing, the needless title parentheses, and the vocal samples, but ramped up. Not only is the title line delivered in an almost time to relax timbre.
It's time to relax. You know what that means.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly.
For a white guy.
There's the introductory nonsense count-in, taken from Def Leppard's Rock of Ages, and the terminally sassy Give It To Me Babies.
Montag, lieben, Glauben, Globen. Montag, lieben, Glauben, Globen.
For the latter, they wanted a Rosie Perez type. What they got was a couple of voice actor veterans, one of whom was Welsh and 7 months pregnant.
Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby.
Even the form of the song comments on taking from other cultures that you don't fully understand. The song again was shaped by a Latin rock classic. In this case, Dexter Holland has said that they were inspired by Santana's version of Oye Como Va.
Getting a tattoo, yeah, he's getting ink done. He asked for a 13, but they drew a 31.
The song's title itself is a dig at claiming black slang years after it's lost its original relevance. Fly was used as a signifier of coolness in the early 70s.
Super fly.
By the late 90s, language had evolved. Fly wasn't fly anymore. The Offspring further sending up just how out of step the subject is.
And he's not quite hip, but in his own mind, he's the dopest trap.
Pretty Fly appeared at the perfect moment, when rock was giving way to hip-hop as the dominant music of teenage rebellion. The Backstreet Boys were singing slow jams dressed like Cypress Hill, and it entered the UK chart at number 1 the day before Eminem released My Name Is, bringing a more credible version of white rap than Vanilla Ice ever managed.
My name is, my name is, my name is, Slim Shady.
And while Vanilla Ice seemed cool about his derogatory shout-outs,
Some cool tunes, not just any will suffice, but they didn't have Ice Cube, so he bought Vanilla Ice.
House of Pain's Everlast at one point felt personally called out, pointing various harsh words toward the Offspring. He puffs his chest out in the press, but he's just a teddy bear. He's back down now. It's funny because the song is not about white rappers. It's about kids trying something new and looking ridiculous when it fails. So you gotta wonder why he's offended. He said our kids are gonna grow up asking why we wrote that stupid song. But we did it for the same reason we write all our stupid songs. It's fun. Americana ended up being their second smash, going 4 times platinum in the US in its first year of release, and with Pretty Fly for a White Guy topping singles charts the world over. By the end of 1998, the SoCal punk revolution was seeming like a momentary blip. Green Day and the Epitaph bands got theirs, but outside of that, there weren't that many million sellers. Americana proved that pop punk was here to stay as a cultural force, at least for another decade or so. Blink-182's Enema of the State happened 6 months later, and then all bets were off. Over the next few years, similarly skater-clad snotty kids with 3 chords to their name would pogo onto radio and MTV.
'Cause I'm in too deep and I'm trying to keep up a thought in my head. Have I waited too long? Have I found that someone? I'll try this all again. Only faster. Tombstone, Nintendo. I wish that I could make her see. I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare. I'm just a kid.
It was perfectly fine pop punk, but something was lost with this new breed. Unlike the Offspring or Green Day, there was less of a connection to the punk underground, less likely they'd witnessed a Black Flag or Dead Kennedy show, that they had ever written a song about a decapitated family member. Though it is trite to say, maybe these bands shifted towards the Backstreet Boys of punk, dressing the right way but missing the edge, the anarchy, the attitude. Such is the mainstreaming of a genre. Even as the yells of sellout rang in their ears, the Offspring remembered their roots. With their first royalty check from Smash, Dexter Holland and Greg Kay started Nitro Records, not only helping promising new punk bands release records.
You're worthless, you're lazy, you're stupid, a little overweight. Buzz me with your walking, spray me with your talking. I am the ambassador, a pink ambassador. You love to bring the chaos in our lives. No, I feel that roar. Don't believe this science fiction.
Yesterday or the day before, definitely yes, yeah, the day before.
Exactly the same way, yet so we drift together.
But also reissuing their debut, and a couple of long out of print TSOL EPs.
Abolish government, there's nothing to me, forget about God. He's not anything we
Despite all this, the Offspring never get the respect that their contemporaries Rancid, NoFX, Jawbreaker and Green Day seem to attract. Perhaps it's because some people think they've released at least 3 different versions of the same punk novelty song with different titles.
the man you disrespecting me. Take him out. You gotta keep them separated.
Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby.
Original gangsta. Breaker, yeah. Original.
I think we can be labelled as a novelty act. People might not listen to the lyrics, or else they might just listen to the hook, or something like that. And because they don't listen to the lyrics, they don't get what the songs are about. They don't get that Come Out and Play is about gang violence. They hear the chorus line, and that's about it. But at the same time, the echoes of Smash can be heard in the current wave of mainstream skirting, hardcore punk. The energy, the mixed tempos, dynamics, and playful genre fusion.
All the mystery. I don't care about nothing for you. No, I don't care about nothing. Why I got to be your stooge?
Smash as an independent release stands as a huge, never again repeated achievement. At least 11 million copies sold worldwide. The only reason it might no longer be the best-selling independent record of all time is because Adele's 21 was released by UK indie XL Records in Europe, Columbia in North America. But no other punk band is ever gonna do that again. Dexter Holland finally got his PhD in molecular biology in 2017. He gave the commencement address at USC to the class of 2022. One of his main takeaways was, hang in there. And that is the essence of the Offspring story. They've been around for 4 decades, their first spent on the ropes, before coming back swinging for decade 2. They were instrumental in taking punk from an obscure, almost buried genre to the top of the charts, to now where it's a talking point in a Superman movie. Every now and again, Holland will state that he doesn't want to be doing the Offspring in 5 years' time, but he first said that in the 90s. And the band is still here. He's a very smart man giving the illusion of stupid music. A suburban punk who managed to make a more than comfortable living from not really being able to sing. And all it took was not giving up. Thanks for watching. So what is your favourite Offspring album? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also share it with a couple of people? It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporter over on Patreon, Mike, and thanks to everyone else that supports me. And I'll see you in a few weeks' time for an 80s new British canon. I can feel it coming. Oh Lord.